Welcome everyone to Jewish Horror 101. Really glad you could all make it. I'm Josh Schlossberg. I am editor of the Jewish Book of Horror, and I am a co-founder of Denver Horror Collective, the publisher of the Jewish Book of Horror. Before doing anything else, I'm going to light a menorah to honor the first night of Hanukkah. So I have my headphones on and I'm going to be playing with fire. So let's see how this works. Can you see me? Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu l'chadlik ner shel Hanukkah. Okay. Fire hazard. There we have it. You can't see it because of the back screen, but it's official. It's first night of Hanukkah. Okay. So as I said, welcome to Jewish Horror 101, a celebration of the Jewish Book of Horror, which is Denver Horror Collective's third horror fiction anthology, available online and at bookstores across the US. I am right now going to play the trailer, which takes about 3 minutes. So sit back and enjoy. Great. Hope you enjoyed that. I'll stick the link to where you can pick up the book in the chat. Now let's get into what Jewish Horror 101 is all about. So the next many minutes, we'll feature 5 anthology authors revealing secrets about famous and lesser known creatures and entities from Jewish folklore and mythology appearing in their stories, including the Golem with Simon Rosenberg, Lilith with Molly Adams, the Dybbuk and the Watchers with John Baltisberger, mazzikim with Emily Ruth Verona, and the alukah with Michael Picco. After these presentations, Jewish Book of Horror authors Ilana Gomel, Richard Dansky, whoever else has shown up tonight, will talk a little bit about their original stories, maybe a minute or so, just about the inspiration behind it or anything they want to say. And then we'll follow up with Q&A. So that's the gist of it. And I think it's time to just get right into it. So let's start with Simon Rosenberg talking about the golem. Go ahead and unmute yourself and I will.
Hi, everyone.
Perfect.
Yes, the golem. So this is a golem. I'm no expert on golems, not on a historical level, and certainly not on a practical level. I mean, I haven't succeeded at making one yet. And as you can see, this one came out much too small. But the most well-known golem story is, of course, the Golem of Prague. But in case you're not familiar with it, it goes something like this. In the late 16th century, the Maharal of Prague, a leading rabbi, Talmudic scholar and mystic who inspired Polish Hasidism and whose commentary is still published in most editions of the Mishnah to this day. He created a man out of clay in the attic of the old new synagogue, and he imbued it with life by writing the word emes, truth, on its forehead, or in other versions, placing a scroll with the name of God in its mouth. The golem's job was to protect the Jews of Prague from persecution caused by blood libels. And he's incredibly effective, but eventually he gets out of control. In Isaac Bashevis Singer's version of the story, the problems start when the golem falls in love and stops obeying orders. And in the end, the golem has to be destroyed. The Maharal erases the first letter of the word emes, truth, so it becomes mace, death, and the golem reverts to lifeless clay. Regarding the story, Joseph Dan wrote in this book, Stories of the Hasidim, it is difficult to find a parallel in the present century, whether in Hebrew or worldwide literature, of a book that has so captivated the popular imagination. Every child knows about the golem of the Maharal, but very few know about the Maharal's authentic literary contribution. And this is my favorite part. Rosenberg is largely responsible for this skewed image of the Maharal. Obviously, he's not talking about me. He's talking about Rabbi Yudel Rosenberg, 1859 to 1935, a prolific Polish writer who later became one of Canada's leading rabbis, who is often held responsible for attaching the Maharal to the golem story some 200 years after the great rabbi's death to make it seem more authentic. But the Golem of Prague is not the only golem story. It's not even the original version. Golem stories have been around almost as long as Judaism. The Talmud states that God initially created Adam as a golem. The earliest written recipe for making a golem dates to the late 12th century. In the Middle Ages, people studied the Sefer Yetzirah, the Book of Creation, a Kabbalistic text to try and create golems. There have been German golems and Spanish golems and female golems and child golems. The first historical figure alleged to have made a golem was Rabbi Eliyahu of Chelm in the 16th century, who created an automaton to help him with chores around the house. The legend has been incorporated into other stories, from Marvel Comics to Terry Pratchett to Michael Chabon's The Adventures of Cavalier and Clay to Dungeons and Dragons, and just about every fantasy video game. It was committed to celluloid as early as 1915 in the silent classic Der Golem, and as recently as 2018's The Golem, and in my opinion, underwhelming effort based on the clay boy variation of the myth. And of course, the golem appears in Frankenstein through the prism of Victorian science, and the Sorcerer's Apprentice through the prism of cartoon mice. Pinocchio, Data in Star Trek, every robot story ever told, the golem more than likely represents the germ of the idea of robots that long before their creation was remotely possible. Curiously, in the Hasidic world, it is still widely believed that the Maharal really did create golem in Prague. And the myth is perpetuated through various supposedly true accounts. The golem's remains are said to lie in the attic of the Old New Synagogue, where the Maharal laid him to rest. During the Second World War, 2 Nazi soldiers are said to have gone looking for Jews in the Maharal's attic and mysteriously disappeared. And there is an actual verified account that Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson, the penultimate Lubavitcher Rebbe, went up there alone, and when asked what he saw, said obliquely, "What remained of him?" There was actually one drunken evening in my youth when I read out a poem by my rabbi from Yeshiva, Rabbi David Ebner, to an aspiring Breslover chassid. And I got to a line where it says, "There was no golem of Prague." And my aspiring chassid friend, he was like, "Shh," and he shook his head in disapproval. I can only speculate that the golem might have been elevated to an article of faith because of its theme that the power to deliver us from our enemies resides in the traditions that are uniquely ours. The golem is an analog of the story that the Jews have told themselves for millennia, that if we cleave to our people, to our faith, our communities, our texts, and our religion, then God will protect us and ultimately redeem us. I'll just tell you a little bit now about my story that's in the anthology. It's called The Rabbi's Wife. It's about a university student who gets involved with the Jewish chaplain on campus because he has a major crush on the chaplain's wife. The chaplain, Fischel, is a charmless, bumbling chassid who stinks of herring, but his wife, Sora, is almost preternaturally beautiful. And as the student gets closer to Sora, perhaps inappropriately close, he gets hints that there is something very strange going on with her that even she doesn't understand. Where it goes from there, obviously, I can't really say without spoiling it, but it involves sexual frustration and ultra violence. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Simon. That was wonderful. The golem is the staple of Jewish horror, and we felt like it was really important to start off with that. Now we have 4 other presentations, and the way we're going to decide is I'm going to spin a dreidel, and whichever letter was chosen by the candidates, that's the order in which we'll go. So Michael and Emily and John. And so Molly, do you all remember your letters? Have you chosen your letters? All right, spinning it. Can't see it. You'll just have to imagine what it's like for a dreidel to be spinning. I spun it too hard. It's going to take a while. Okay. It is the Gimel. You can't see it because of my screen. Who is Gimel? That's John.
That's me.
Okay, John, welcome.
Gimme. Hello, everyone. Side note, there's a lovely argument in the Talmud in which the argument is whether or not it's kosher to create a chicken golem and slaughter and eat it for Shabbat. Because obviously you can create the golem. Obviously you can create a chicken golem. Obviously you can then eat the chicken golem. But should you do it on Shabbat? It's defining questions of our times. Man, the Talmudic rabbis really love to write about things they didn't know about. And for some reason, they didn't know a whole lot about demons and golems, so they wrote a lot about it. It's fantastic. I am talking about dybbukim and the Watchers and Nephilim. One of the great things about Jewish folklore and mythology is that it's been around for an incredibly long time. And due to the diaspora, it's spread out and touched all these other cultures and in turn been touched. And so the folklore and mythology of Judaism is at once all spread out throughout the entire world, but also takes flavors from all the other cultures in the world. So the first thing I want to say is there's a movie that everyone suggests whenever Jewish horror comes up called The Possession. No, it is not a good dybbuk movie. It is a Catholic demon exorcism movie where they swapped out a priest for a rabbi. Please stop suggesting it whenever anyone asks for Jewish horror. So, what is a dybbuk? A dybbuk is a ghost, a spirit. Generally speaking, it's also a possessing spirit. To differentiate it from, say, like a poltergeist or just a haunted house, a dybbuk is specifically going to haunt a person. Now, a lot of this I'm taking from a book by Rabbi Gershon Winkler that specifically speaks to dybbuks and spirits. One of the interesting things about Rabbi Winkler is he went from being an ultra-Orthodox writer of Jewish mythology to an ultra-flexodox kind of New Age practitioner, one of the founding fathers, so to speak, of Jewish renewal. That movement with Rabbi Shlomi Schechter, Rabbi Shulman, Zalman. Anyway, sorry, I'm talking fast. I just have so much to say, and I know it can be annoying. So I'm going to kind of compare those two sides of the dichotomy. In his early days, we were looking at the dybbuk as spirits who had, through their actions, created too many evil angels. And this is one of the hard things about talking about Jewish mythology and horror, is that you can't just say, like, okay, a dybbuk is someone who created too many evil angels. What does that mean? And it goes on and on. There is a Gada, there is Midrash, where whenever a person does a kind deed or follows a mitzvot, they create a good angel. Whenever a person does an evil deed or is cruel, they create an evil angel. And at the end of their life, these two groups of angels argue with the judge, Hasatan, on whether or not this person should be allowed to enter the world to come. So let's say a person creates too many angry, pissed off angels. They're real dicks. Rabbi Winkler specifically chose Shabbatai Tsevi for this story, who, if you aren't aware, is a false messiah who, due to being threatened with decapitation, converted to Islam after really building a nearly worldwide following of people who really believed he was the Messiah. Anyway, his explanation is the dybbuk is someone who has done evil and doesn't want to face the music of his or her evil angels, or perhaps is afraid of going to Sheol or Gehenna for a year to deal with whatever happens. And so they hide. And the only way to hide their essence is within another person. And so a dybbuk will possess someone. They physically enter the body. They control it, although they mostly just kind of lie around and are a-holes. And when they speak, they actually have to move to the throat. And you can see the like goiter of a dybbuk, and they'll vibrate the vocal cords. And so a dybbuk sounds a little bit like a cicada when they speak. A person possessed by a dybbuk sounds a little bit like a cicada, like high-pitched, noisome, irritating. However, later on, when Rabbi Gershon became a little less of a stickler, shall we say, he says that the truth is that dybbuk is formed when someone is unsatisfied with their life. He says that he has met, I believe he said he met, I could be putting words in his mouth, and if so, I'm sorry, but he met a dybbuk whose chief concern was they never had a decent bagel. Another anthology of Jewish horror, Corners of the World, features 3 stories by one author about dybbuk, and in each of those cases, one dybbuk was a gluten-free girl who just really wanted to eat cookies. One was a young man who was gay and never came out. These are the things. And so in those cases, the exorcist's job is not to drive off the dybbuk, right? The exorcist's job is to heal the dybbuk. There's some kind of pain that the dybbuk is feeling and some kind of pain that the host is feeling as well. And so it's the exorcist's job to heal both people through prayer and loving kindness. Thing we as Jews kind of say all the time: loving kindness, loving kindness. And I find that a much more beautiful explanation. Okay, Watchers. I really love my take on the Watchers. This may not be in line with a lot of other people's, but the basis of it is that the Watchers were the first rebellion. Now, it's important to remember the Book of Enoch is not considered canon. It's considered apocrypha. It's considered agada, folktales, meaningful folktales, sacred mythology. But it's not actually in the Torah or the Tanakh, or the Gemara, or any of the other 19 words for Bible we have. The Watchers were angels, a huge chunk of angels, led by Semyaza, who came to Earth and were super horny. They really thought human women, and it's very specific that human women were attractive. And they came to Earth and they began to teach humankind things like jewelry making and art and astrology and alchemy. And one angel, a real asshole named Azazel, taught mankind the art of making weapons and the art of war. Interestingly enough, in the Yom Kippur liturgy, 2 goats are sacrificed, one for the sins of all mankind and the Jewish people, and one for Azazel, every single year, meaning that the weight of the sin of teaching us weapons and cruelty is equal to everything humans have ever done since, completely. I believe firmly in my heart that the power dynamic between an angel such as Semyaza and a mortal woman is so vast that there's no way this relationship could have been consensual. Now, the angels had children with women. These are the Nephilim, the giants. There have been 3 separate wars against giants in the Bible. Although you know the stories, you may not recognize them as being like, oh, this is a giant war. But that's kind of how they play out at the end of the day. The Nephilim, the children of the Watchers, are the cause of the flood in Enochian mythology. They were so wicked and so horrifying that, and they poisoned humanity so much that we kind of had to just scrub our hands and say goodbye to the whole thing. Of course, that didn't work because King Og, one of the chief children of the Watchers, rode on the back of the ark and survived the flood and went on to have more children, and more angels would fall over time and make love, sweet, sweet, terrifying, angelic love full of eyes and wings and animal parts to create more giants. So eventually, long story short, I'm so sorry, I've gone way over time, I know. I see the look on Josh's face, he's furious. The floods come. They wipe out most of mankind, almost all of the Nephilim, and Enoch comes. And Enoch comes, and he's a scribe. He's just a writer. He's one of us. And he's like, hey, angels, God's pissed. And they're like, well, can you ask God to forgive us? And Enoch does. He writes a beautiful letter to God, and it's like, hey, man, can we forgive these guys? They'll come back. They won't do this anymore. And God says, no fuck those guys. And he chains all of the Watchers to the bottom of a mountain, floating in space, essentially, floating in a void of nothingness. Because remember, the Watchers crave sensation. The entire reason they fell is for sensation. So they're surrounded by nothing except for a couple of stars, and I want to say 2 planets that refused to follow their celestial paths. Humans have free will. We can do whatever, and we're not going to get chained to the bottom of the mountain, probably. Unless Greek mythology. Anyway, however, angels, planets, stars do not have that free will. So this is sort of a early kind of physics of like, okay, well, certain things have to obey the plan. Mankind doesn't, but things do. There's a lot of weird lessons that you can take from Enoch and the Nephilim and the Watchers. A lot of it is kind of outdated and fucked up, won't lie, but a lot of it is also good. Specifically, I would say like the power dynamic thing and respecting others and respecting other cultures, which is something that the Nephilim and the Watchers were incapable of doing. If you want to know more about these things, because Josh said I could self-promote, I have a book out called War of Dictates, which is a Talmudic horror story written in verse, which deals extensively not only with the Watchers and the Nephilim, but their interaction with the Shadim, which is another word that kind of means demon, but also kind of means fairy. Thanks, everyone.
Awesome. Thank you, John. That was tremendous and illuminating. So thank you for covering 2 topics. That's a 2-for-1, folks. And check out John as well as Simon and whoever else is going to be coming next. They'll put their links in the chat. So I encourage you to pick up their other work, not just the Jewish Book of Horror, but also the Jewish Book of Horror. All right, time to spin the dreidel again. Who will it be? So we already did hay. So if it falls on hay, my powerful, of course it was hay again. Yeah, that's how it works. So if I were gambling tonight, I would have won something. Wait, Gimel? Did we already do Gimel? I don't remember. Who's Gimel?
I think if nobody can remember, it's probably me.
Sounds perfect, Molly.
Perfect. Okay, so I'm Molly Adams. I run a little website called Jewish Horror Review, and I wrote the introduction to the Jewish Book of Horror. I'm here to talk to you today about maybe one of the most iconic Jewish demons and the founding member of the First Wives Club, Lilith. Lilith first shows up not in the Torah, as you might expect, but in the Midrash, which serves as like a rabbinic commentary on the words of the Torah. From day one, Lilith is a figure that can largely be found in the margins of stories. Sorry, my cat's just jumped on my desk and made me lose my place. So yeah, she can largely be found in the margins of stories, rarely actually there, but with a presence that overshadows everything. Even her name isn't ever overtly stated, and her very existence is only ever implied. Instead, Lilith is likely to be the creation of rabbis and scholars whose interpretations of Genesis 1:27 gave rise to this iconic depiction of dark femininity. Lilith's first appearance via the Midrash is in the story of Adam and Eve as Adam's disobedient first wife. Where Eve was born of Adam's rib, Lilith was made of the same soil and dust as her husband, resulting in a woman who wasn't satisfied with the paradise of Eden or with just being the mother to Adam's children. Truly the modern woman trying to have it all. Crucially, she isn't ejected from paradise like Adam and Eve eventually are, but she chooses to leave of her own accord, refusing the 3 angels' pleas for her to return. Lilith's refusal to be tethered to a man is mirrored by a refusal to be tethered to any god's will, and as such, her exit from Eden is an act of insolence rather than one of independence. As with most mythologies, stories of Lilith vary massively from this shared origin point. She frequently gets merged or grouped in with other demonic figures, the most common being Asmodeus, who serves pretty much as the king of demons. Whether Lilith is Asmodeus's queen, his wife, or even if she co-opts his role entirely, she's never been a neutral character. She's always positioned on the side of evil, even though her choice was simply to reject Eden and Adam. Some scholars even reject Lilith as a wife of Adam entirely, arguing that she's just a demon who pretty much got upgraded by years of debate and revisionism. But even if you accept this origin story, the discrepancies pop up almost immediately, especially with regards to the paternity of Lilith's demon babies, who are the focus of quite a bit of folklore. As a dark opposite to Eve, Lilith is a maternal icon, but instead of being the mother of humanity, she is the mother of demons. Originally, when the angels come to plead with her to return to Eden, they find Lilith nursing her children in a cave, just constantly giving birth to demons, much like Chaos in Paradise Lost. So some theories attribute these children to Adam, with their demonism being entirely their mother's fault, while other baby daddy candidates are the archangel Samael or any number of male demons. But the story goes that the angels threaten her, trying to prey on her maternal instinct by swearing to kill 100 of her babies for every day that she doesn't return. In revenge, Lilith vows to kill children who aren't protected by angelic amulets or sigils, and is said to be responsible for all stillborn births and the death of any baby who dies in their first 20 days of life. This is one of the only consistencies across the entire Lilith mythos. As you can probably imagine, a defiant wife turned baby killer is ripe for feminist reinterpretation, especially when Lilith is held in contrast to her counterpoint, Eve. Just as you might have mermaids and sirens as different sides of the same coin, Lilith represents this dark femininity, rejecting patriarchy, motherhood, and the societal expectations of women. And crucially, this is where her power comes from, and this is where the horror comes from with Lilith. As I've just mentioned, she's often marginalized, but the motif of Lilith's cave, of this place where demons are born from this dark mother, that keeps on popping up across folklore, with every mirror being a gateway to Lilith's cave. In stories like The Bride of Demons or Helen of Troy, there's this whole theme of illusion and also of punishing specifically feminine, or well, quote unquote, feminine sins. Lust and vanity in particular are sins that are associated with Lilith and with the people that she preys on. I think I have probably rushed through there. But one of the things that really stays with me about Lilith, and one of the things that I really find interesting, is that much like all of the other best horror villains, she can never really be killed or defeated. She just keeps on popping out babies and they keep on terrorizing the communities. She can just be briefly escaped. She can be outwitted and negotiated against, but she absolutely cannot be defeated. And that is me. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you, Molly. I've definitely been aware of Lilith, but I did not know all of that. And I'm sure it's an education for pretty much all of us. So thank you. It's excellent.
And if anybody would like any book recs or anything like that, I'll put some on my Twitter at some point, at Jewish Horror. But just hit me up if you want any recommendations or anything like that.
And please put your links in the chat, Molly, so folks can find you. Thank you,
Will
Molly.
do. Thank you very much.
I'm going to spin the dreidel again. We have 2 more presentations to go, and then Q&A. And I'm actually rigging it, and I'm saying nun. Who's the nun?
That was me.
Beautiful.
That's me. My name's Emily Ruth Verona, and I will be talking to you today about the mazzikim. My story in the Jewish Book of Horror is called A Purim Story, and it involves these demons called the mazzikim, and I may or may not be familiar with them. I originally, when I sat down to read about them, I kept feeling like I was tiptoeing around the periphery of something that I couldn't quite grasp with both hands. As a fiction writer and someone very interested in horror, that ambiguity definitely drew me in. I wanted to know more about this elusive, mysterious entity. However, the more research I did, the more conflicting reports I found, and realized that I didn't actually fully know what was true and what wasn't. And most of the material, I'm sorry, I'm reading because I'm nervous. So that kind of ambiguity that I found in my research is absolutely perfect for weaving into fiction, and absolutely terrifying for when you're trying to discuss something. So what exactly is the mazzik? The plural is mazzikin or mazzikim, and it is a term from Jewish mythology and refers to the invisible demons which cause damage by way of small annoyances or sometimes more serious harmful ways. They're invisible, subtle. They're not evil with a capital E, but they can cause a lot of extensive damage all the same. One of the things I noticed most in my reading is how mazzik is often used as an all-encompassing word for demon, and kind of has a wide variety of usages, which kind of heightens that sense of ambiguity I was talking about when I first began my research. The word mazzik is first referenced in the Talmud and translates to damagers or those who do harm. Mazzikim cause trouble in everyday life. They create havoc in small, unavoidable ways. One of the texts I read described them as, quote, human instincts driving us towards our own destruction, end quote, which I found really interesting because little havocs and human imperfections are pretty much the nature of life itself, all the pieces that pile up and the small transgressions. And I found that to be really compelling. A lot of the time when you hear about demons, you think possession, but the mazzikin aren't associated with possession. Instead, they're ever present and kind of exist everywhere. Some say the best course of action when faced with them is to learn how to live with them, which again feels very true to the nature of all human experience. And there's a lot of ambiguity there, room for interpretation. You get the sense that living with them kind of has a feeling of finding balance and spiritual peace, but yeah, sorry. Okay, so earlier this year, there was a movie that came out called The Vigil. And the writer-director for that film, Keith Thomas, in doing interviews, talked a lot about how part of his draw to the mazzik was that whole sense of ambiguity that I was talking about. And I found that interesting. The Vigil, if you're not familiar with, is about a man who's tasked with being shomer for a night, someone who sits with the recently deceased to protect them from evil. And I watched this movie about a month after the Jewish Book of Horror came out, and I was struck by how the movie made me think so very much of this profound sense of cause and effect, which when I was writing about the mazzik in my story was something that I thought about a great deal. How these demons cause havoc in little ways and how these little havocs can change the course of a life. There's something of the butterfly effect in the chaos that they unleash. Little destruction here, little destruction there, and that amounts to something more over time. In that way, the mazzikim are striking for the longevity of their impact. They're not the demons you necessarily go out and try to smite. They are the demons that you live with, the demons of daily existence. And I found that to be really compelling, which is why they're in my story in the Jewish Book of Horror, foreword story, and I hopefully didn't fumble too much through that. So
That was great, Emily. That was awesome. Thank you so much. And please feel free to put your links in the chat so folks can find other stuff or how to contact you or whatever you like, your home address, leave whatever information you wish. Thank you again. So we are going to close out our presentations with Michael Picco. It's going to be talking about the alukah, which who has actually heard of the alukah? Put it in the chat real quick if you've heard of the alukah, because I had not. And the winner gets a dreidel. Just no, not really. You can buy your own dreidels.
I would like to talk to you tonight about the alukah. But first, I'd like to wish my Jewish friends and colleagues here a very happy Hanukkah. Secondly, I'd like to thank Josh and the members of the DHC for making this event possible. I really appreciate it. The alukah is the vampiric entity or entities found in my story. The horse leech has two maws. In this presentation, I'm going to explain my inspiration behind the creature, its origins, and how it was adapted to the narrative. During this presentation, we'll be doing a bit of a deep dive into biblical translation and how different cultures and storytellers portray vampires and demonic entities like the alukah. So now, according to my research, the alukah roughly translates to horse leech, a type of leech with many teeth that feeds on the throats of animals. And you'll see why I say roughly translates in a moment. You know, Emily talked a little bit about ambiguity in her research and how variable some of the factual information is and how it bleeds over into other areas. That is very, very much true with the alukah. According to biblical scholars, alukah can mean bloodlusting monster or vampire. The alukah is first referenced in the book of Proverbs, specifically chapter 30, verses 14 through 16. It only appears in one place in scriptures. And this is the passage here. They have teeth like swords and fangs like knives. They devour the poor from the earth and the needy from among humanity. The alukah have two maws, and always they cry out, more, give us more. This particular section of Proverbs is referred to as the words of Agar. Agar ben Jakka was an Arabic sage and compiler of a collection of proverbs found in Proverbs 30, which is sometimes referred to as the book of Agar or the sayings of Agar. The word alukah closely resembles the Arabic word for horse leech, aluk, and ultimately could be the reason why alukah was translated or mistranslated as horse leech. Obviously, this is a metaphorical description of the creature that reflects the insatiability of fire, drought, and the grave. But for the purposes of the story, I took this description quite literally and made it an actual creature. But you have to ask yourself, what is this creature and why is it in the Jewish Book of Horror? I won't go through the entire breadth of this slide, but you can see that there are, as Emily alluded to, a lot of nuance and a lot of ambiguity in the word alukah. On your left, you can see the Encyclopedia of Vampiric Mythology and all the different types of alukahs and alugahs. They range anywhere from common flesh-eating ghouls to succubuses to actual demonic entities and demonic lores. The crazy thing about the alukah is that it never appears anywhere else in the Bible. This is the only place where it occurs is in Proverbs, and it makes it difficult to ascertain its true biblical meaning, which you can see I've highlighted in yellow over on your right. The takeaway for this particular slide is the alukah was a female night monster or vampire who sucked blood from her victims. Likewise, the Jewish Encyclopedia links alukah to alukah, a Hebrew succubus and female vampire. There is little doubt that the Arabs aluk and the Hebrews alukah are the same demon. According to a comprehensive demonic pantheon compiled by historic researcher Mark Carlson of the University of Tulsa, the alukah was a direct female offspring of Lilith. So again, we have tie-ins to what Molly was talking about. As you see, there are obvious reasons to hold this opinion. The similarity between the alukah and Lilith is so vast that the two very well may be the same entity. So this creature has a lot of vampiric associations, specifically alukah, a demon specific to Babylonian and Assyrian mythology that was later absorbed into Hasidic lore. The demon is credited as being the demon that tormented Saul. And you can see the letters up here and comprising the Hebrew of alukah. The most interesting translation of this section of Proverbs comes from the New Living Bible. And it starts out, the leech hath two suckers. So that's my addition to the biblical passage at the beginning of my story. One mouth that bites and another that suckles at the wound. So the most detailed description of the alukah appears in the Sefer Chazadim, a 13th century German text that ushered in Jewish mysticism. This document describes the alukah as a shape-changing, blood-sucking entity or witch who can fly like a bat when her hair is let loose. And it's that phrase, releasing her long hair, that is an important aspect in portraying the creature, as I'll soon explain. As I mentioned before, historically, the alukah has been closely associated with Lilith, or thought to be her direct descendants, namely the daughters of Lilith. Molly mentioned this particular entity as birthing many demons. Here we have the actual daughters of Lilith mentioned. The name alukah may be another name for Lilith, in fact, her itself. In his book, Eros and Evil, The Sexual Psychopathology of Witchcraft, R.E.L. Masters describes the alukah as a, quote, Hebrew succubus and vampire derived from Babylonian demonology. So, the alukah in the alukah, we have a creature with roots in Judaism and in Christian tradition. We have a creature with associations with vampire and demonic entities, and a creature that can alter its shape and that can fly, particularly by releasing its long hair. But what about the two suckers? That's an important thing in the context of this particular passage. Let's take a closer look at the Annelida family of parasites. This is the family of ringed or segmented worms that includes leeches. Some of the parasitics have two distinct classes of suckers, namely Bothridia for true suckers and Bothria for false suckers. Typically one which attaches the parasite to the vascular area on the creature, and another which inflicts the wound on the victim. Thus, my addition to the scriptural quote on the first part of the story, one mouth that bites and another that suckles on the wound. But you're asking yourself, what kind of vampire employs this sort of feeding mechanism? That is, one mouth that bites and another which draws blood from the wound. Well, the introduction of pharyngeal jaws or secondary mouths is a relatively new concept in vampiric lore. You see it most prominently in Blade 2 with the introduction of the Reaper vampires. That's Nomak in the actual story, and more pronounced in The Strain with the Strigoi, and that was released in 2014. This satisfies the description of the alukah as having two suckers or two maws. And this is a quote from my story. From its slavering mouth extended a second tubular maw, one lined with row after row of hooked and numbered teeth. But neither of these types of vampires are demonic in association or in affiliation. So for that, we have to go and travel to Malaysia. I'd like to introduce you to the Malaysian vampire, the Penanggalan. The Penanggalan was once a witch, a consort of a demon. These creatures were able to fly, that is to say their head and neck could fly when loosened from their bodies with the viscera descending from them. And that makes them particularly gruesome, while their bodies remain behind. Whenever the person for whom the Penanggalan wished to injure might live, thither flew their head and bowels to suck on his blood. And you can see at the top of this slide the various artists' interpretation of this creature. In all these, you can see the hair as it fans out. This is what I saw as loosening the hair, as described earlier. This flurry of hair and movement, and this is kind of the ethereal currents that propels this creature throughout the story. So other research suggests that Penanggalans result from dark sacrifices meant to stave off the torments of the next life. And I think it was John that kind of touched on that, with the dybbuks. The Penanggalan is a blood-drinking, undead creature of great power and horrifying appearance, obviously, as you can see from the picture. It masquerades as one of the living during the day, but as soon as night falls, the creature assumes its true form. Its body goes limp and the head detaches and then rises into the air. As it flies, the Penanggalan sometimes whispers vile secrets, hellish curses, and debasing torments that only the creature would know. When a suitable victim is found, the Penanggalan will fly through an open window or melt into a disgusting ooze in order to crawl in through small gaps in walls or under doors. If sunlight strikes a Penanggalan's head while it was separated from its body, The head and the body will rapidly rot away. So in the horse leech has two maws, we have a hybrid vampire of sorts. One that has a basis in both Judaic and Malaysian folklore, a vampire that can fly, has two mouths or suckers like the reapers and the strigoi, and can masquerade as a human, even in sunlight. They can shapeshift, albeit in a quite gruesome transformation, and have demonic associations or affiliations. Like other traditional vampires, Panoglins are drawn to places of human misery and tend to choose places where their predations are not going to be readily noticed or prevented. All these conditions, which were prevalent in the labor camp at Theresienstadt, the setting for my story, and in the boxcar journey there. Worthy of note, the alukah is believed to be repelled or restrained by music, which is why the creature is drawn to and held in thrall by the orchestra's music, and again by Micah, that's my main character's music, in the otherwise abandoned music hall. Also worthy of mention, these creatures primarily prey on children, which is made evident in the addendum of the story, where the bodies of additional Panoglins are found underneath the empty children's dormitory in Theresienstadt. And that's it.
Excellent, Michael. Thank you. That was
Sure.
mind-blowing and terrifying. So we are going to finish up the night with the other attendees who are Jewish Book of Horror contributors to talk maybe for, 30 seconds to a minute about your story. You can say the inspiration, just don't give away the ending. So Ilana, do you want to just say a few words about your story and why people should read it?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you all for your wonderful presentations. And let me tell you that it was totally illuminating to me, because I know next to nothing about Judaism. In fact, I didn't know I was Jewish until I was about 12. And when I asked my mother what it meant, being Jewish, and she said, oh, it's a disease. And even though I lived most of my adult life in Israel, Israel is a state of Jews, but it's not a Jewish state. So as I thought, for me, being Jewish does not mean, believing in any particular God or confessing any particular religion. It means being sick, having an illness which you didn't ask for, and yet it marks you off as different. I was born in the USSR. I left when I was a young teenager. But my story, which is called Bread and Salt, is about Jewishness as a mark of difference. Jewishness as a negative quality, not as a positive belief or tradition or even history. It's being different and not knowing why you're different and what it means, except that you are, and everybody knows you are. So the story I won't give away its ending, but it's based on my family's experiences. Everything described in the story really happened to my grandmother, except the ending, hopefully. So again, thank you again for those wonderful presentations. It was very impressive, and I learned a lot. And Hag Hanukkah Sameach, which means Happy Hanukkah to you all.
Thank you. Same to you, Ilana. Definitely check out her story. Mark Morgenstern, are you still here? Are you among us?
Yes,
Mark?
I am.
Oh,
I'm right here. Hi.
Excellent. Feel free to say a minute about your story, the inspiration behind it, whatever you like. Thanks for being here.
Absolutely. Well, the good news is that everyone on this call, and actually everyone in America this week, will have access to the inspiration for my story. And that is the Broadway show Annie. Like most Broadway musicals, it was written by a Jew or perhaps two Jews. You all know who they are, ranging from Leonard Bernstein to Martin Charnin to Hammerstein and so on. So once upon a time, I went to a Jewish funeral, and as we're walking out of the chapel, someone had chosen to play, someone in the family, perhaps the funeral home, had chosen to play the song from Annie called "The Sun Will Come Out Tomorrow." And that's where I plan as I'm walking with this group to get in our cars to go to the gravesite for the most solemn part of this funeral. Someone says, referring to the guy in the casket, well, not for him. So the inspiration, so what if the sun did not come out tomorrow? And what might go wrong at a funeral, particularly when it's conducted by a rabbi, namely a cantor who's filling in for a rabbi, and his disillusioned wife is in the last row in the audience or in the congregation. So I'll leave it there. So number one, you'll watch Annie live on December 2nd, and then you'll buy the book if you haven't already, and you'll read my story. It's called The 38th Funeral. And Josh, I'm not sure if I'm not seeing something conspiratorial here, but it begins on page 38. So for that, I thank you. And you could all read into that, whatever you'd like.
Thank you so much,
Happy
Mark.
Hanukkah, everybody.
Happy Hanukkah to you. Next, we have Richard Dansky. Would you like to say a word about your story?
I would be very happy to. And first, I want to say thank you to everyone who presented tonight. It was fabulous. I learned a lot. Really appreciate the time and effort you put into that. So thank you. My story is called On Seas of Blood and Salt. It is about a magical pirate rabbi fighting zombies. And if I can come up with a better tagline than that, it has escaped me. The character was inspired by a historical rabbi, Abraham Palash, whom I read about in a book called Jewish Pirates of the Caribbean. And he was both a founding figure in the Jewish community in the Netherlands and a pirate. And I thought, well, let's add a little magic to that and see what we get. And so far, I've written 3 stories about Reb Palash, the first of which appeared in The New Hero from Stone Skin Press. This is the 3rd story of his adventures, and I hope you all enjoy it. Thank you very much. Happy Hanukkah.
Thank you, Richard. Yeah, when I saw Richard's story, I knew right away that had to be the first story because in a sense, it comes out of left field. Who would expect the Jewish pirate? Like you wouldn't necessarily put the two together, but it makes for a great entry into the book. So every story is a gem. And I can say that because I didn't write the stories, right? I just said, hey, somebody write stories. And then people did, and they're all pretty amazing. So I believe we have one last, a couple more. So we have JD Blackrose. And then if any of the presenters want to talk a little bit more about the story then we'll get into the Q&A shortly. JD, please go ahead.
Hi, I know my thing says Joelle Rises. That's my name, but I write as JD Blackrose, and I apologize. I fell off for a little bit because my cat walked behind my computer and unplugged it from the wall. So my story is Welcome Death, Cheery. When I shared it with my mother, she said, that's so scary. And I said, Mom, Jewish book of horror. So it's a dark fantasy look at the pogroms of 1918, 1919. I wanted to write something about those years, which were the most lethal times, other than the Holocaust. More Jews died in Galicia than really at any other time, and I wanted to take a look at that. And so that's really what the story's about, and I hope you enjoy it. And I'm really proud to be a part of the anthology, and thank you to everybody for your presentations.
Thank you, JD. It's a stunning story. Do any of the presenters want to say anything more about their stories? Anyone want to chime in real quick before we get to the Q&A? John.
Yeah, because I never shut up. I will say that my story is a maybe kind of extreme or splatter punky take on the Herschel and the Hanukkah goblins. So if you're like me and you grew up reading that every year and loving it, you will be able to see the DNA of the short story of The Eighth Night.
It's great. It's brutal yet educational. So I highly encourage read that. You have to read all the stories. So we're going to do some Q&A now. If folks want to just unmute themselves and ask a question for any of the authors or several of them or 3 of them, whatever, And if people don't like talking, you can just put it in the chat and I will be the person who says things.
If you already have your copy of the Jewish Book of Horror, kudos. You should pick up a physical copy because it's beautiful. Look behind Josh, it's gorgeous. You can also pick it up on Kindle from Amazon or the digital copy from the website godless.com, which is not quite so godless. In fact, currently there's an event called the 8 Nights of Madness, in which all of my Jewish books and the books from Madness Heart Press are 99 cents. My point is that there's lots of outlets for indie horror and Jewish horror. There's a lot more Jewish horror than a lot of people think, and all respect to Simon, there's a lot more to Jewish horror than the Golem, which I'm glad we have so many other people talking about tonight. And obviously, Simon, your presentation was fantastic. I'm a Maharal fanboy.
Yeah, gotta have the Golem. There's just you can't do it without the Golem. So as the editor, so when we put out the call for submissions and you first saw it, do you recall thoughts you had, like excitement, dread? Let's go through based on just who's on the screen here. Whoever, just speak, whoever likes to speak. Yeah, Joelle, JD, go ahead.
Yeah, you can call me either. I have to say, it was my main thought was, oh, thank God I have someplace to put this story, because I had written that story a while ago. Actually, I went back and looked, and I think my first drafts were definitely like, I don't know, they were well over a year before I saw the call. And I had tried to place it in other places and no one would take it. And it was too Jewish. It was not horror. I don't know. It was fantasy, but it's not what we're looking for. I got a lot of that. And so I was so happy to see the call, because I thought finally, this is a story that's been waiting for a place. So I was really thrilled.
Yeah, well, that's excellent to hear. Yeah, too Jewish. Yeah, I do think that some folks, it's not they're like, oh, it's too Jewish. It's just, I think they're afraid. Some publishers are afraid to touch this category, but I was not. Who else? John, what were your thoughts when you first saw this, since I stole the idea from you anyway?
I wasn't going to say that specifically, but JD, allow me to say, since Josh has foolishly given me the floor again, you should learn. I am the editor of a press called Madness Heart Press, which has an imprint called A Gotta Try It, specifically for Jewish speculative fiction. Not Jewish studies, not Jewish historical fiction, not Jewish realistic fiction, speculative fiction, because I wrote a couple of Jewish urban fantasy books and could find nowhere to publish them. Every press I looked at was like, oh no, we don't do that. And if Josh doesn't mind me getting a little fiery up on my bema for a moment, there's a real problem in Jewish literature right now, in my opinion. And that is that there's a double standard of like, we can't assimilate, we have to protect this, we have to be taken seriously, therefore we can't publish horror or bizarro or science fiction or fantasy. We have to be serious. And it's a real shame that the only things being published are Holocaust studies or studies on the Hasidic movement, or here's how I converted, or here's how to do a bar mitzvah on the cheap. Because as I mentioned earlier, Jewish folklore, Jewish culture has existed for so long across the entire world, and they're so rich and beautiful, and there's so many cool stories to tell. So Josh and I, obviously, we talked about this book a lot as it was kind of being born. We talked about not only what it needed to be, but how we could best reach an audience, not just within the Jewish community, which obviously we want Jews to see this stuff and be super stoked. We want them to know that there's authors and writers out there that are aren't interested in telling stories that relate to them, but also to the wide, the much larger non-Jewish audience in the world, because we do want to make money, obviously, but also because these stories are super cool. And it would be great if whenever someone asked for a Jewish recommendation, the options weren't The Possession and a Golem story. If other people knew, and it on like, let's be completely fucking frank here, if Jews knew that there was more to love and enjoy about the culture and the folklore and mythology. That said, when you first said it, I said, all right, cool, I have the story. I think I sent you the story like 5 minutes before you put the call up. So I was ready. I had my finger on the trigger.
Super glad to have you involved. Yeah, I was calling John. He's the Moses of Jewish horror. He is leading the way and still doing some amazing work, continuing to put out a lot of Jewish horror and other horror, and glad to have you a part of this. Thank you, John. Richard, what did you think when you first saw the call for submission?
I thought, oh God, I need to get into this or I'll have to turn in my membership card. But seriously, I was very pleased to see the call. Obviously, the Reb Palash stories have a very strong Jewish element to them that was not always to the taste of other editors. And I thought this would be a wonderful place to tell that story. So thank you for putting this together.
Beautiful. Thank you, Richard. So yeah, whoever wants to go.
Yeah. Okay, I just wanted to tell you, I'm an academic as well, and I actually wrote a lot about Jewish fantasy and Jewish horror and Jewish science fiction before I even started writing myself fiction. So I come to it from two different directions. And there is also a whole issue of Israeli speculative literature, which is totally different from Jewish. But I so loved when I first saw this call for submissions. I said, this is it. Because I had like a bunch of stories I wrote in the past, which are about the Holocaust, about Jewish history. And I worked with several writers in Israel who write much more in Jewish themes than I do. So I said, oh, finally, finally it's coming out not in a sort of small marginal, specialized, but it's a book of Jewish horror. And I know there have been other anthologies, like somebody mentioned Corners of the World, which I'm familiar with, and there have been others. But I just hope it's only the beginning, because, it shouldn't be a ghetto, forgive my slang. So Jewish horror, just as Jewish literature in general, it's a central, if not the central part of world literature. And thank you, Josh, and as I said, I just hope it's only the beginning.
Yeah, I agree. Just opening the door to more of this. That's the goal. Even though we call it, one person sent an email saying, it's the Jewish book of horror?
Well, the Jewish book of horror is called the Bible, but so this is a Jewish book of horror.
It is, but it sounds a lot cooler as the, so that's what I call it. But yes, I want this to be the beginning of something, and glad to find a home for some stories that nowhere else would publish. I think that's really sad, and maybe now that this is getting out there more, it can start opening the doors more. Michael, what about you? When you saw the call for submission, what do you think? And we got a couple other questions too.
My first thought was absolute panic, and I was a newly minted member of the DHC at the time that I saw this, and I had submitted a story, the very first part of the story to the DHC crit group, the short story critique group, and gotten some good feedback on that. But I really felt like I had to elevate my game for this particular anthology. It was a challenge for me to come up with a story. As a Gentile, and with little exposure to the Jewish community as a whole, it was kind of difficult for me to step into a storytelling role. And so the horse leech was very challenging, and it was a deep dive into a lot of things about the concentration camps and the Holocaust, and about various aspects of Jewish folklore that I had no conception of before I saw the call.
Excellent, Michael. Thank you. I guess we'll get a couple more answers from authors if they want to, and then I have a couple other questions. Of course, folks, if they want to cycle out, nothing's stopping them. Maybe we'll try to cut this off by another 13 minutes or so. So it's 7:30 my time. So Mark or Simon or Molly, any thoughts when you heard about the call for submissions?
Yeah, a friend of mine told me about it, and I just thought I have to be in this. It was the Jewish Book of Horror. I think absolutely calling it the Jewish Book of Horror is brilliant, but also because, like, I mean, I don't know if people agree about this, but I've always found that, in my experience, Jews don't seem that into horror. So. And Jewish horror seems like quite a rare thing. I don't know if that's true, but I don't know what the source of the aversion is to it. I was once at a screening of the first ever Israeli horror film, which was called Rabbis, I think, and it had the directors there doing a Q&A, and they said, in Israel, nobody watches horror films. And you know, the American horror films play in the cinemas, but no one goes to them. I don't know, that tallied with my experience. So I very much, when I saw that this was happening, I was like, yes, yeah, I've got to be in there. And I'm very pleased to be. So yeah.
Great,
Thank
great
you.
to hear. Thank you. Mark, and then Emily, if you want to say what your thoughts were.
Yeah, well, I have to say that, I mean, I think the two pillars of Jewish horror are on this call, and those are John Baltisberger and Josh Schlossberg. And the connection between the two, helped me, and I think is helping this community. So I think we owe them a lot of respect and thanks, not just for convening this, but also together providing a home. In the case, I had a story in one of John's collections, and he recommended me to Josh, and then Josh and I and it was a very nice and fruitful collaboration and back and forth with Josh on my story. So I think what I'm kind of taking away from this is not only all the wonderful stories that I'm going to read again here, but just that there is a community that seems to be forming, and the fact that John and Josh have given so much of us a home for our work, there's seems to be a desire to have a little home for our community as well. So we'll see where that goes.
Great. Yeah, I poached Mark from John. John had his anthology, and I read through it, and there were a couple authors. I was like, I'm going to steal them, and I did. So glad to have you on board, but we can all share Mark and others. So Emily, and then if Molly, you also got anything to say, but Emily, go ahead. What did you think when?
I actually thought I was hallucinating when I first saw it, because anyone who's ever known me has heard me go on and on about how I wanted to watch more Jewish horror movies. And year after year, I kept seeing Christmas horror anthology calls over and over and over again. And I kept going, where are the Jewish horror stories? Where are the Jewish horror story calls? And so when I saw this one, I got really, really excited about it, because I already had a Jewish horror story I'd written that I had absolutely no idea what to do with. And so the second I saw this call, I was like, oh my goodness, this is amazing. This is exactly what I have been asking the world for. And it was really incredible. So I was very excited about it.
So good to hear.
Yeah, when I saw the call for submissions, I was still doing my master's thesis on Jewish horror, and I was just so excited. And I thought, God, I have to get involved at this, whatever level I get involved on. And I think that was actually how I got into contact with you, Josh. And yeah, I ended up writing the introduction, which was very exciting for me.
Cool. So we have 3 questions and then we'll probably close things out. So let's see this one question from H. David, might be Henry. Anyway, his question was, and whoever wants to answer this, who have the authors, I assume, was there any modern media out there that helped any of you conjure your stories? Anyone want to say anything about that? Just jump right in.
Absolutely. And I mentioned that in my presentation with the Strigoi and with the Reaper vampires. Big influences on the final visualization of the alukah.
Definitely. Anyone else? Any answers to that? We can move on to the next question. So from J.T. Patton, as this book reaches non-Jewish audiences and creates interest from non-Jewish authors who want to write about similar themes, will it still be Jewish horror or just horror with Jewish elements? Curious as to the author's thoughts. Authors, thoughts?
If I can just hop in here to say about one of my views of Jewish horror is that it can fit into 2 broad categories. The first one, which is obviously Jewish horror about Jewish history, mythology, and folklore. And then the other that fits into a really way more nebulous idea of having a Jewish sensibility. You can see that a lot in comedy, where it's very much off vibes and the culture and things like that. And I personally am very interested in seeing a lot more horror in that vein. And I think perhaps the key example that I can bring to mind is the film Hereditary. Ari Aster often frames himself as a nice Jewish boy who's making movies like Hereditary. And it very much has that dark humor that I think could be a really interesting direction for Jewish horror to go in. I don't know if any of the authors have any thoughts on that.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I absolutely think that sort of second category is it's an area I'm very interested in, and yes, yeah, my second novel that I've been editing for 5 years is kind of in that vein, not overtly Jewish, but kind of draws very much from that stuff. It has it's kind of the small town, small community life, only, you know, they're demon worshippers, but it's that whole, this synagogue banter and, you know, all that stuff. But I don't know if I'll ever finish editing it, so yeah.
Another novel that seems to be going in that direction, although I'm not very far through it, is The Orchard by David Hopen, which, yeah, seems to be going down a Jewish take of a book like The Secret History, going very much into Gothic and dark academia, but that's me.
If I may, I will put on my academic hat and say that it's a subject of great debate, you know, what is Jewish literature? In fact, there is a book called What is Jewish Literature by Hannah Nasher. And it's a debate, you know. So as far as I'm concerned, I would define anything having to do with Jewish history, folklore, mythology, and so on as Jewish literature, because, sorry, my throat is aching, Jewish sensibility, like what Jews are we talking about, you know, Moroccan Jews, Ashkenazi Jews, Sephardic Jews, you know, secular Jews, religious Jews, Hasidic Jews. All of us are Jews, but we all have very different sensibilities. So I would rather define Jewish literature in terms of what it is about than who it is by. But I do agree with you. There is like American Jewish sensibility, for example, which totally defines a body of American Jewish literature and American Jewish horror, but it's not all Jewish literature. That's all I'm saying.
Oh, definitely. I should have absolutely specified that. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, these are great thoughts. Probably a good time to end it. Thanks everyone for attending. Thanks to all of our guests. Thanks to the presenters. Thanks to all the contributors to the Jewish Book of Horror. You can buy the Jewish Book of Horror pretty much anywhere from Amazon to Godless to, it's in like every country. It's in Asia, it's in Australia. We stash copies out in the forest, so you might find one out there if you're just walking around. And if you like it, please rate it and review it on Goodreads, Amazon, wherever else. That really helps get it out there more. And yeah, really thanks again. And let's keep making this happen. So thanks everyone.